You start your day thinking that today I will definitely complete this abstract or write this piece of code or finish this review that has been pending for a long time. And you get onto your task. You're halfway through it, takes a couple of hours probably. And then somebody comes and interrupts you, or you get a Slack message or an email that you need to immediately do this little analysis and send it back. So you do that. And when you get back, you realize that suddenly your flow has been lost, and it's taking much longer for you to get back to the task that you were completing on in pretty efficiently early on, right? It it happens to all of us, and this is, I think, the major cause of loss of productivity in academia. It's completely mired with interruptions of all kinds and forces you to what I call, or people call it, context switching. So let's talk about it, because I think this is something that we all suffer from. And a few things that I have learned, my colleagues have learned, and I'm still learning and struggling to learn at times, of how to deal with context switching. So this is another video for life in academia. Most of the time we discuss issues that very, very few people discuss. I don't discuss a lot of productivity hacks, really. There are many videos on it, but some of them that are very particular and specific to academia, I think, are worth discussing. This is one of them. I'm Kshitij. I'm an associate professor at UConn Health in the United States, and I am a principal investigator of the evolutionary medicine lab that works on reproduction and cancer metastasis. And we use a variety of techniques, from computation to animal models to cell biology and so on and so forth. So it's a pretty integrated lab. Anyway, context switching. I think people don't realize that what is the really biggest cause of switching context between one task and the other? It is when you move from one task to the other and try to get back to it. It is not just the time it takes to switch from the task, because obviously that is, you take time to get adjusted to another task. You finish that task, you probably come back to the previous task. It's not just the time. I think what's the most precious thing that is lost is the loss of the mental model that you have developed for a particular task, which just completely dissipates, it's completely erased away, and you need to rebuild it again. Academia, unlike many other jobs, probably, for example, in HR or marketing, I mean, there are projects everywhere, but in academia, projects are quite different from each other. Tasks are quite different from each other. You're doing research, but you're not doing research every day. You're unlike, for example, you're in a clinic, you are treating patients, treat each patient may be different, but that's the modus operandus for you every single day. You meet a patient, you diagnose a patient, you look at the reports, and you goes and you apply your knowledge, you apply your interpretative skills, and you move on. Academia is quite different, because although you use your skill sets in your more common work, you have tons of other tasks that you need to do, right? If you're a PhD student, it's not only that you're doing research and doing data or coding or some kind of analysis, but you also must be taking your courses, which means you have assignments, you have presentations to make, you have fellowship applications to write, you have to attend seminars of other people, you have to, of course, attend meetings, and you need to learn new techniques constantly, because obviously, this is one part of the job that life changes very, very fast. You need to be on top of skill sets and techniques all the time. You have to read papers, you have to attend journal clubs, present journal clubs, and so on and so forth. And I think universities also make life, in order to train the students, sometimes they make the life also much more complicated than it needs to be, without realizing how much of context switching students have to go through. It becomes a little less worrisome when you're a postdoc, because a lot of that didactic burden is completely removed from you. But then during a postdoc, you need to apply for grants, you need to constantly search for places you can obtain money to do your research. You have to probably apply for jobs, think about your promotion, and then continue to work on your papers, listen to presentations. The works are very, very complex, and this is beyond what is really required to do in your actual job, which is either in a lab or on a software platform, and so on and so forth. When you switch from one task to the other, you are basically creating a whole castle or a mental model in which a lot of things are coming together in order to allow you to function effectively in an intellectually meaningful way. And when you context switch, you throw that model completely away. And you can think of it as like you're reading a novel, let's say a detective novel, and in the middle of a novel somebody comes and you've read a few pages, the character built up has taken place. You see how much work goes into the character build up, right? You would be describing the character, the physiognomy, the way that person talks, the way the person walks with a stealth, and so on and so forth, and the environment around it. You build all that atmosphere, which is now there in your mind. That's a mental model. And then suddenly somebody comes and says, forget about that book, let's think about it 3 days later, and right now let's read another book. When you come back to it, you need to kind of go back a few pages to understand, okay, which characters were those, I've forgotten the names, and so on and so forth, right? So you have to erase your mental model and rebuild your mental model. Of course, second time it's a little easier, but that's a lot of opportunity cost gone. So remember that context switching is extremely, extremely expensive. It's a huge tax you pay on your time and your overall productivity. So how to avoid it? First of all, you need to think about it both in daily times as well as long term, right? So there are tasks that you need to finish on a daily basis, and you come with a mind prepared. I'm going to work on this abstract today, for example, right? Set aside time, allocate time, and allocate it when nobody could really disturb you. It could be in a little air of yours, or maybe while you're having coffee somewhere else, or just working on your experiment. But make sure you have allocated time in chunks of hours, not half an hour, not 1 hour, but say 4 hours, so that you can meaningfully finish your task. If you finish your task before that, that's great, and you can move on to the next level. Allocate time for it, because you will get emails, you will get Slack messages, you will probably find someone just walking into your room and interrupting you. I do that all the time, and I receive, I'm also on the receiving end multiple times. You're thinking about something and somebody walks in, and then you need to immediately leave it and start thinking about the next, the problem that the other person brings in, right? And engage with that problem. It's part of the job. So allocate time in a way that nobody can really disturb you, and finish some tasks over it. And keep aside time for emails, responses to Slack messages, responses to inane requests from everybody else, including your supervisor. Okay, that's me, but including your supervisor, because you cannot keep up at a half an hour frequency with these kind of requests. If you do that, you will destroy your productivity. So try to, so many people who try to be too engaging with their people, sometimes they actually harm their students very much also, because if you're constantly engaging with them, constantly talking with them, you might also disturb their peace and disturb this deep work that they might be involved in. Sometimes I do that, and I know I make that mistake, but at times I become cognizant of it and try to keep myself away from walking and just disturbing everybody. Second thing is, you need to think about long-term allocation of time, right? Probably on a weekly basis. So I have begun doing it in my own. I had a big patch of low productivity, and I was wondering what really went on. I realized I was working on too many projects at the same time. So now my way of working is that, although I'm a PI, so a lot of engagement has to happen in many different fronts. But at one point of time, I am working on one project. So right now, for example, I'm writing a manuscript on certain aspect of reproductive biology for the last few weeks, and that is where my mind is. 10% of the time, I might devote to other manuscripts, responding to other people's questions so that those works continue. And wherever my inputs are required, they could be provided in a sustained manner. But my time, my allocation of work, my mental bandwidth is completely dedicated towards one project. When that gets completed, I move on to the next one. And I let that be known to other people that that's the next one. Okay, so please be ready, so that everything, all the ingredients are cut and chopped and ready, so that I can go and do the final cooking. Okay, so allocate your time on weekly basis or a monthly basis, so that you are not moving because these, projects in academia can be very, very complex, right? It takes years to build a good paper and or a good product or a good patent. So if you are constantly moving from, this week this and this week this or half a week of that, it is extremely, extremely difficult to actually be continually productive. So try to allocate time on weekly and monthly basis, and then ask yourself, over probably a quarterly basis, or maybe 6 months, where what was lost. This, by the way, happens in, I mean, it probably doesn't happen in other businesses, but in our area, which is in biological sciences and medical sciences, people write a lot of grants, and so do I. And you need to respond to grants in what are called these grant cycles. So NIH, the National Institutes of Health in America, has three different, every 4 months you can submit a grant. And sometimes I wonder, I wish that it was not as frequent, because in that way I don't have to respond to this deadline. So what we have begun to do in our lab is not only take 2 deadlines a year and not 3, because that allows us some time to actually build up on the work and write papers, and not constantly responding to grant deadlines, because you're working on a project and then the grant deadline comes, and so you leave this project aside and then you work on your grant. Your grant gets completed, and you walk back onto your project, but again your mental model is completely lost. The data are lost. You've forgotten where all the raw data were and what kind of thinking processes you had done. So how much ever you're thinking and write it down, your mind is much more complex, and it is holding ideas that you cannot really put down on the paper that easily, because if it was so, you could have written the paper directly, right? It takes a lot of synthesis, a lot of time to put some complex things together. So please make sure that don't context switch on a daily basis, weekly basis, and over long-term perspective basis. And I can tell you this, and I've seen it in my mentors and people, very, very highly successful people in academia I have had the privilege to work with, that I only get emails from them probably 1 time a day or 2 times a day. I've noticed it, they have this specific time which they probably look at the email, and then they do not look at the emails at all. So be comfortable not responding. Be comfortable that your emails are going to get accumulated and you are not going to be responding to each and every one of them as soon as they are coming. How much ever your administrators are angry, learn to ignore all of that. Because if you do not do that, unlike other jobs, your job requires dedicated, allocated time to do deep thinking. It takes sometimes half an hour and 1 hour to get into that mode, to start thinking about the idea that you were thinking just 2 hours ago, right? Because a lot of things have to come together in your mind. It's not a sequence of work that you just need to complete. A lot of, for me, like many genes and many cells and everything have to come together to create a picture in my mind as to what really is going on. And this is obviously true with any kind of complex project. Do not respond. Learn to be comfortable with unresponsed task or unfinished task, and then find allocate a little bit of time towards when you are probably mentally tired to respond to all of that. Okay, maybe on a weekly basis, maybe on a daily basis, as and when you require. Of course, you need to probably respond to them, but do not do it all the time. Don't be hyper responsive. If you're hyper responsive in your responses to other people, you will have no time to do your own work. Okay, so let me leave it at this, and we'll continue to make to bring more ideas together. And as now a little bit of corpus has started developing, I highly suggest that you subscribe to the channel, distribute it, or forward this to other people who might be interested in these ideas, and give your feedback as to what you might want to discuss. I'll also be bringing ideas from my own colleagues and how do they deal with challenges in academic life, and how they navigate all of it and bring it to you. Okay, so till then, take care. Goodbye.